Urban revitalization may sound like an unequivocal good to some, but it's more complicated than that, especially perhaps in smaller urban centers that don't think of themselves as needing or wanting much change. To find out what our hubsters are hearing, let's welcome back. From our studio in Kingston, Ontario, there's David Rockney-Corrigan, who heads up our Eastern Ontario hub. From our studio at Western University in London, Mary Baxter, who heads our Southwestern Ontario hub. And here in studio, Jayan Jagannathan, our Ontario Hub's field producer, and it's good to welcome you three back to our airwaves here in the Big Smoke. David, I want to start with you in Kingston, because we've just heard what the story is in Hamilton. You and Mary have both got pieces on tvo.org about this issue in your various parts of the province. Talk to us about the Inner Harbour neighbourhood and what's going on there as it relates to this issue.
Sure. So the Inner Harbour neighborhood in Kingston, for people who aren't familiar, is along the Cataraqui River, hence the Inner Harbour, and it's just north of Princess Street, which is sort of Kingston's main drag, if you will. And, you know, this was an area that has generally been a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood. A lot of the industry that was sort of found along the river there, you know, factories and docks, as the economy sort of shifted, a lot of those factories and jobs sort of disappeared, and you know, with it, a lot of the working class families sort of vanished along with it. And you know, it still has that working class feel, but it has gained a reputation sort of since around the 1970s as being a less desirable part of town, a poorer neighborhood. It's you know, gained the moniker north of Princess, you know, sometimes lovingly, sometimes derisively by people in the city. But it's a thriving neighborhood now. There's certainly been a shift, especially since the 1990s. You know, a lot of artists and professors moved into the neighborhood that maybe weren't able to afford houses south of Princess. You know, so there's been a gentrification there, and with it a pretty passionate conversation around that over the last 20 years, but it's ramped up particularly so in the last decade.
Okay, Mary, let's go west to London. Tell us about the Old East Village neighborhood there.
Well, Steve, a lot of it is similar to what David was talking about in Kingston. A working class neighborhood. There, a lot of the people worked for either the railroads or industry, and the neighborhood fell on hard times. Then around 2000 or so, the neighborhood residents decided that they wanted to do something about it. There was a lot of crime in the neighborhood. People were feeling unsafe. And so they set about revitalizing their neighborhood and put plans together and worked really hard on it. One of the key principles that they embraced as they moved forward with this was that everybody should have a home. So it didn't matter if you were on a fixed income, there would be a place for you, or if you were just dealing with a low income or something like that. And it's kind of like the ingredients that they put into their revitalization effort, I think of it as in terms of the ingredients of a cake, you know. They put a lot of really good stuff in, and right now the neighborhood is in that process of kind of baking. And you know, the question is, will it rise the way that it's expected? And I think for the most part, it looks like it's going to rise, but there's still some challenges in terms of coming to terms with some of their more vulnerable populations.
Okay, let's stay with the food metaphor here as we go to Jayan, because you got a field piece on right after this discussion in London, and pick up the angle about food there. It used to be a food desert, didn't it?
There was no baking at that time. And so a decade-old study out of Western University looked at food accessibility in London, and what they found was in the East End, in the Old East Village, to some locals known as East of Adelaide, this was a food desert. There was no grocery store at the neighborhood at this time. There was an underutilized farmer's market. And so a lot of management had changed over. The farmer's market was bought out by a guy who had a vision, who I profile in my piece. His name is Dave Cook. And he went out and he attracted a lot of businesses. And those businesses now have standalone shops along Dundas. So they've really done this kind of grassroots initiative where they've fostered these businesses on the farmer's market angle, and now they can prosper on their own. And so Dave Cook has taken this principle and strategy, has opened up is this incubator called the London Food Incubator. You got your grocery store, he owns and operates his own coffee shop out of the front, and then you have at the back about 8 or 10 businesses, same principle, low rent. They can essentially start up their business and eventually maybe move out into a standalone.
And we'll see the actual evidence in just a few minutes after we finish this. David, come on back in here and talk to us about ground zero for this gentrification debate in Kingston, a place called the Elm Cafe. What's the significance of it to this story?
Sure. So the Elm Cafe has become a bit of a flashpoint for the conversation around gentrification in the city. The Elm Cafe opened in 2016 by a couple of young 30-somethings from the city. They opened up an indie cafe. It's got sort of a vintage aesthetic with hardwood floors and Victorian-style sofas and chairs. And it used to be a laundromat. And when it opened in 2016, almost immediately it was embraced by the community. I think about 2 weeks after it opened, it was hosting concerts for a local arts festival, and it feels as though it was almost a cafe that the community didn't even know it needed until it was there. But it's also become a bit of a saga around it. So a couple of months after it opened, the owners, came to the cafe and discovered that one of the windows was broken. And, at the time they just chalked it up to, maybe a drunken reveler having a bit too much, violent fun. So, they just, decided to, fix the window. And about a week after the window was fixed, they woke up, because they actually lived above the cafe, to more windows being smashed, and they went down, and it, according to one of the owners, it seemed as though somebody had taken a hammer and struck the center of every single window. So, that attack, that vandalism, it felt a little bit more personal to the owners. They took their time in replacing the windows, sort of did it one at a time, staggered to sort of prevent any further vandalism. But before they were even able to replace that last window, a vandal struck yet again and broke the windows. So that, at this point, it was making headlines, and somebody in the community actually put together a GoFundMe. But before, they were able to put in place more security measures, there was a fourth incidence of vandalism. So although the police never officially connected the vandalism to anti-gentrification sentiment, it was certainly the thought that the owners had that it was related, and the suspicions went through the community. A lot of people connected the two things, even though the police may not have done so in a formal way.
Okay, Mary, let's go to your situation now as we try to follow up on what some of the reaction in London has been to the gentrification. You talked in your piece to a low-income Londoner who wants to move into the Old East Village. What's the story there?
Cornelius Berg actually lives, right now he's living outside of London, but London has been his home for most of his adult life, and he wants to get back. He's on income assistance, and he's facing eviction in his current apartment. He wants to move to Old East for a couple of reasons. One, the area has a reputation for low rents. But the other part of it is that there's a lot of social organizations and charitable organizations there that can help people who might be living on just a little over $700 a month for all of their rent and their food. In Old East, the way it used to be was that you might have to pay a lot of your money to rent, but there are still places where you could get food, so you wouldn't go hungry. But that's changing. A big part of it is that the vacancy rates in London overall have plummeted. It's just like a little over 1%. So it's really a landlord's market. And where it affects in Old East is there's been some development. Some people have been displaced, but not very many so far. But the bigger issue is, if it's a landlord's market, who do you think that they're going to want renting their place? So right now, Cornelius is realizing that he's going to become homeless.
Jan, this whole issue of gentrification obviously has two sides. On the one hand, bringing old neighborhoods back. restoring older buildings, that kind of thing, for a new generation. But on the other hand, some displacement that goes with it as well.
Right.
In your travels in London, talk to us about the nature of the conversation that's happening there around that.
Well, the first thing I'll say is some of the people would say it's not gentrification, it's urban renewal. So there's a conversation there as well. But one of the organizations that I spoke with was the Unity Project. And it sounds cliche, but it is for the people, by the people, is the initiative that I've kind of seen, whether it is from the businesses that are popping up or the social services there. And the Unity Project, you know, the executive director, Chuck Lazenby, has lived in the neighborhood 15, 16 years, just as long as that organization has been there. So she is...
Chuck is a woman, we should say.
Chuck is a woman, yes. And she has seen the changes in this neighborhood, and she has a good conversation and discussion with these new businesses and people. So I think that's kind of what I was surprised to see in a lot of the organization. The businesses said, you know, you have to live here in order to see the changes and be there because you need to be accountable. And I thought that was kind of amazing because it's, you know, when these forums, when these meetings happen for either new developments or a safe consumption site, both sides are at the table. Whether they disagree on the topic or not, they're at the table. I think sometimes when you have bigger enterprises and organizations that come in, that can get kind of crossed over. But here, that discussion's happening. So.
Back to Kingston. David, whether you call it urban renewal or whether you call it gentrification, what are you hearing in Kingston in terms of you know, potential solutions to the problems that arise whenever these issues come forward?
Well, I don't know that there is a solution per se on the horizon. You know, I think the fact that this conversation is taking place, I mean, you look at, there's a Facebook group called the McBurney Park, and McBurney Park is a sort of a park within this Inner Harbour neighborhood, and they've got a Facebook group that was originally supposed to be, you know, for parents that wanted to, you know, get kids together for play dates and that sort of thing, and, you know, it's ballooned. There are over 1,000 members now, and the conversation around gentrification has really taken shape on this particular forum. And you know, I don't see any solutions, but I do see that a conversation is happening, and you know, it's a pretty sophisticated conversation at times. I mean, it's evolved. There are a lot of people that you know, that criticize this Facebook group because it seems like a lot of people are just saying, oh, there's a sketchy guy in my backyard collecting bottles, but it's also, I think, put the awareness of the issue in a lot of people's minds. And you know, I spoke to a lot of people, and there's a certain kind of guilt almost that comes with being a, you know, a quote-unquote gentrifier. One person in particular who, you know, moved to the neighborhood about 25 years ago and considers herself a, you know, a gentrifier, but she's also somebody who, you know, has dedicated her life to issues of poverty and food security, and she sees it as a larger issue around class. And for her, you know, she says what's important here is that we get a little bit more comfortable with these kinds of uncomfortable conversations. And for me, that could be, you know, where a solution comes through, is just this idea of having conversations to get to new understandings around what's going on and what's going on in this community.
Mary, can you take 30 seconds and just add to that whether you're hearing any solutions to the problems that arise with gentrification or urban renewal in your neck of the woods?
I think that they've done a great job. Old East has done a lot of things right. There's affordable housing, there's geared to income housing there, but the other thing that they really need is supported housing. And there's some rumblings that some of that might be coming into the neighborhood as well, but nothing firm yet.
Gotcha. You want to set up your setup back here?
I do indeed. So
okay.
I definitely want to echo what Mary said, but this piece that's airing right after this segment looks at essentially the fine line that the Old East Village is doing. And again, they're doing a great job, and it looks at those conversations. So have a take.
This is the London Food Incubator. Nestled in London, Ontario's Old East Village, this 15,000 square foot historical building, once derelict, is breathing a new life. The front of the building houses a local coffee shop and a grocery store, while the back is home to several small businesses.
What this place was created to do was give them a halfway stop, so they don't have to come in and do massive renovations, they don't have to commit to long-term leases, and they can have a space which is about 500 square feet. They can have for $550 a month, which is extremely cheap.
Dave Cook is the mind behind the Incubator. He is the owner of Fire Roasted Coffee and one of the social entrepreneurs behind the neighborhood's revival.
This would be at Dundas and Adelaide. So when you hear the classic east of Adelaide, they're referencing this specific block that we're doing business in. And so it's Old East Village.
The neighborhood was associated with poverty, homelessness, and unemployment. A decade-old study by Western University named London's East End a food desert.
Everyone was shopping out of variety stores by and large. We had Professor Jason Gilliland from UWO do a study of food pricing prior to the market and food pricing after the market, and it had dropped to the tune of, I think it was around the neighborhood of $200 a month people saved on food.
In 2006, Cook took his roasted coffee bean business, which he was building in his garage, to the farmers market.
Been driving through the community one day and it said market starting, vendors wanted. I had a fair trade coffee company that I was roasting at the time and joined the market.
For $80, he rented a booth at the Farmers and Artisans Market at Western Fair. Not long after, he purchased the market from the original owner. Now, many of the businesses, just like Cook's, that got their start in the market have popped up along Dundas Street and have taken a standalone location.
We've got full-blown grocery stores, we have full-blown restaurants, we have bakers, we have cheesemakers, we have butchers. You know, any community would beg to have these type of people in their community, but it wasn't that we sat there and waited for them to locate it, we grew them.
Sarah Merritt moved to London in 1992. She has seen the changes not only as the longtime manager of the Old East Village BIA, but also as an area resident.
The building stock and infrastructure has improved, and the vacancy rate on the business district has declined significantly. But the reason that my husband and I located in this area was because of the incredible sense of community.
Not only have new businesses set up shop along the business corridor, but new development is coming to the Old East Village. The neighborhood has approved a 5-story affordable housing apartment, and work is well underway at the former Kellogg plant. The site is being transformed into an entertainment hub that would include a huge indoor park and brewery.
Everything that we've done has always started with conversations within the community, broader meetings with the community. If new developments come in, we get people out, they look at what's being offered, they get the opportunity to give their input.
But with all the development, at least one organization is feeling anxious.
The thing that worries me, I think, most is over time, you know, the housing prices are one piece, the rent prices are one piece, but there's also a social cost to gentrification, which is why I think that the rule about talking about what the reality is versus perception, talking about reducing stigmatizing language and, you know, ensuring that the people that are experiencing poverty are included as part of this community. Because people, when they don't feel welcome in a community, then that's where they can feel displaced, and not just physically displaced by the cost of rent and the cost of housing, but also in that pressure you feel from the neighbors and the community itself. Residents are the ones.
Chuck Lazenby is the executive director of Unity Project, an emergency shelter in London's Old East Village. The organization has called this neighborhood home for over 15 years, and Lazenby herself has lived here for just as long. The Unity Project also provides transitional housing for the city's most marginalized members. Finding permanent housing in the area has been difficult.
There's challenges when it comes to finding people places to rent throughout the city, and certainly this neighborhood used to have more viable options for folks who were on a limited income, and that's very quickly decreasing.
The city is looking to set up a safe injection site, and the downtown area, including the Old East Village, has been looked at as an option.
There are certainly folks who are saying, like, absolutely not, that will bring, you know, crime and more problems to this neighborhood. It makes it unsafe. And then other people are saying, this is a health issue that we need to, you know, make sure that the people who will benefit from these services have access to. I think the Old East Village is in that place of, you know, having these debates and discussions and really participating in any kind of community forums that come up with what's going to happen to their neighborhood. And I think that if there's the two opposing perspectives are represented.
Merritt argues what's happening in the Old East Village is revitalization, not gentrification, and the people who live in the neighborhood have the biggest effect.
I don't believe you can make this level of change if you don't live here. I don't. I think you have to live here. It's 7 days a week. You've got to be answerable to your neighbours.
Many communities will try and wait for some outside entity to come in and bless them with economic activity, but we had stumbled across a way to create our own, and it became wildly successful, so much so that it's studied elsewhere in the city and elsewhere around the province as a way to give community and residents of that community some power to create their own economic destiny.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jan. And to our hubsters out of town, David Rockney-Corrigan in Kingston, Mary Baxter in London, thanks for joining us tonight on TVO as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.